Hello, everyone. Hello, tribe, folks, friends, and family. So good to see you guys again. I'm so happy that we're here again live with the Global Youth Coalition and the Oxford Net Zero Global Youth Climate Training Program. We're going to start a really nice session today. So we prepared something really terrific, a session on the most sexiest topic in the UNFCCC, said no one ever. A topic that you all love, and not just because I am the younger contact point for it. Just kidding. Or that was very romantic of me, but yeah. Jokes aside, this topic is becoming ever more relevant, and it's key to moving the needle for climate action and setting global South countries out of the stress and burden that limits them from reaching sustainable development. Today's session is titled Climate Finance, Shifting the Trillions. But before we dive into climate madness, finance, I'm honored to be moderating this session with one of the most inspirational human beings that I've personally known. While she was 17 and still in high school, she has already a natural-born innovator, winning the first place award in the regional Tahawa Sustainable Innovation Competition by creating a microplastic filter that can clean 1,000 liters of water with only $1.5 almost dollars. Her invention is now undergoing implementation phase in Egypt. Are you hyped? Do you want to know who she is? Of course. You know who she is. She's Luigi, our co-chair of the Global Youth Coalition. Here you go. Over to you,
Hi,
Luigi.
everyone. How are you? We're honored to have all of you here with us today, and a big thank you to our speakers and newest participants for attending. So the first thing I'm going to say is Eid Mubarak to our entire Muslim community. I hope the next few days are like super fun and like you have tons of like fun and spending time with your families. Okay, so next, you guys know the drill. We're going to give the rules of engagement. If Fred could go to the next couple of slides. Fred, could you go to the next few slides? Okay, here we go. So we're going to go over the rules of engagement and then we'll share the attendance link with you. Okay. So next slide. So sorry for the delay. Okay, so the first rule that we have is that we're all going to respect each other. We're all going to make sure that we make each other feel comfortable. The second thing is that we all use respectful language. The third thing is that we remember to remain inclusive, and we're going to ensure that all of your voices are heard and valued. And the fourth thing is that we're going to respect your time exactly like you're respecting ours. And the fifth one is if you do have any questions for any of the speakers, please submit them on Mentimeter. So we're going to share the attendance form with you in the chat. Just a second. Okay, so that's that. And now I'm going to introduce our very first speaker, Charlene. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce Charlene Watson. She's an environmental economist and zoologist. Charlene's work is focused on how investment decisions can respond to multiple risks of fostering sustainable development. Her expertise lies in analyzing the flows and sources of public climate finance at all levels, and aligning those levels of climate finance things with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Charlene's unique skill set includes work on REDD+, a complex field intersecting conservation, development, and climate change policy. Her career spans academia, multilateral institutions, and NGOs. She is an accomplished writer across various mediums, bringing a multifaceted perspective to our session. Please join me in welcoming the lovely Charlene Watson.
Thanks so much. I'm very happy to be here today. I really appreciate the invite and the opportunity to speak to you all on the Global Youth Training. I am a Senior Research Associate at ODI in the Climate Sustainability team, and I've been working on climate finance for a decade now. And in that decade, I've seen a huge shift from where we've been talking about the billions, a few $1 billion flowing through climate change trust funds, to the Paris summit last week, where we're really talking about how we can create a new financial system that's really fit for purpose. So it's really exciting times. I have a lot to cover. I've been asked to speak to you today about three things. The first one is really, what is climate finance? The second one is, what is this Article 21C of the Paris Agreement and why is it important? And the final one is this horrible acronym, the NCQG. So I'm going to start sharing my screen because I do have a presentation to give you. But I really want to emphasize that I'm not going to be here to try and tell you what you should be calling for in the lead up to Dubai, what we need to shout about in particular, but rather I'd like to help shape the way you think about climate finance and provide you that depth of thinking that we critically need. And this is about not just shaping the next news cycle, what the headline from COP is going to be, but really thinking about how to do things differently in the future and really achieve the fundamental transitions that we need and provide the financing to do so. Okay, so what is climate finance? The first thing to note is that we don't have an official definition of what is climate finance. There is a lot of work going on in the background to try and resolve this issue. But really the UNFCCC tends to have the most widely accepted definition, and that's really about financial resources that are being used to adapt and mitigate to climate change, both globally and also in the context of flows from developed to developing countries. And this pledge, this commitment of flows from developed to developing countries results from historical responsibilities for climate change and common but differentiated responsibilities and the respective capabilities of different countries in order to address it. And so climate finance is in and of itself a way of embedding climate justice and equity into the multilateral system, with developing countries being able to contribute climate finance on a voluntary basis. I'm not sure you can see the picture, but I'm sure you'll have access to these slides afterwards. But the fact that we don't have a definition makes it really difficult to count how much climate finance there is, because everybody has a different perspective on what counts. So some of it might be, some people might believe that only grants count as climate finance, whereas other people might think a guarantee or a loan might count as climate finance. Some people think that, climate finance only counts if it's going to a recipient that sits in a developing country. Others might think that a northern think tank based in London being funded to work on climate finance issues might count as climate finance. So there's lots of different things in that table that you can think through. But what counts as climate finance is really quite a personal issue, and one that we haven't yet resolved. Perhaps the most well-known part of climate finance is going to be the commitment that was made in 2009 in Copenhagen that said that developed countries will commit to mobilize jointly 100 billion a year by 2020 to address the needs of developing countries. And that funding was going to come from a wide variety of sources, both public and private, bilateral, multilateral, and with alternative sources of finance thrown in there. So you might already see a pattern emerging here. The blue text is just a few illustrative words of why we get ourselves into all sorts of accounting difficulties. This is not just about the definition, but climate finance has been historically associated with all this loose wording that was absolutely required in order to make the political compromise in order to get this goal. But it doesn't necessarily help us. We don't have any list of who counts as a developed country. We don't have any list of who counts as a developing country. And, you know, some of those, some of the annexes that were set under the convention don't necessarily sit under the Paris Agreement. And we need to take that into account when we're trying to hold countries to account for providing climate finance. The Paris Agreement in 2015 follows the phrasing of the 100 billion. And it says that we'll have at least 100 billion a year until a new goal is agreed in 2025. Okay, so challenges aside for the definition, these circles, which are not to scale, show you various estimates of how much climate finance we need. And they show that in those solid lines that are estimates of how much climate finance we have fall far short of the needs. So specifically, the Energy Transition Commission estimated that we need capital investments for climate action for a zero carbon economy to be 1 trillion a year by 2025 in emerging markets and developing countries, and they excluded China in their analysis. In the nationally determined contributions from 153 developing country parties, as analysed by the Standing Committee on Finance, a body under the UNFCCC, said we need about 5.8 to 5.9 trillion up to 2030. And I've just divided that figure here to put it on an annual basis. And that's about 0.7 trillion a year by 2030. So the Standing Committee also estimated that globally we have 800 billion a year in total finance flows. So you can see we're falling far short of the actual needs. And right at the bottom, the OECD has estimated that reported climate finance that was mobilized and provided by developed countries in 2020 was 83 billion a year. And in the last couple of years, there've been a clear recognition of the failure to provide the promised 100 billion a year by developed countries. So there has been a slow rise in climate finance over the last decade, but clearly we're not going far enough, fast enough. But the reason I've got the question mark on the right-hand side is because I urge you to consider what you're interrogating here and the information being presented to you. So what I'm doing is showing you these circles to kind of give you the scale of the challenge and a sense of the needs. But it's really important that you see up the top, I'm showing you some developing country needs. In the middle, I'm showing you a global total flow. And at the bottom, I'm showing you provision from developed to developing countries. So we're kind of comparing apples to oranges here. And that's going to be really important as we move forward and set a new goal for climate finance, because we're not saying that all of the needs need to be met by developed countries. There's going to be different ways of meeting those needs. And in particular, not all of it's going to be able to be met by public finance. And we need that public finance to work very hard to mobilize private finance. So those estimates at the top include this required mobilization of all actors, public and private alike. And that's worth thinking about when you're interrogating an analysis that you see, in particular when it talks about the gaps in climate finance. So this is just another table that kind of emphasizes how complicated taking stock of climate finance provision is. This table is from the Biennial Assessment and Overview of Climate Finance Flows. So this assessment, as in the title, happens every couple of years. Again, it's from the Standing Committee on Finance. The table is showing us the public climate finance flows that developed countries have made available to developing countries. Public finance is very important because it can often absorb more risk and accept the lower returns than private finance. And therefore, it's got this critical role to play in stimulating climate action, particularly for adaptation actions, which don't often have revenue streams. And of course, public data on climate finance is the stream of information for which we have most data. So what you can see here is that of all of these sources, there is more money going to mitigation than there is to adaptation. But again, it's important to look beneath those total figures because more adaptation finance is provided on a grant basis than mitigation finance, which is often provided as concessional loans or other financial instruments. And this is important when we consider our pursuit of a balance between adaptation and mitigation finance. We desperately need to scale up adaptation finance. I don't think that's going to be debated anywhere, but it's going to be really important. And what form do we need to scale that up? And as I said, like where there are not revenue raising possibilities, a lot of that finance is likely to be public and is likely to be grant-based. In contrast, some of the mitigation finance that we need, a lot of that can be provided as other instruments because what it's trying to do is mostly crowd in private investment. And so this table is really trying to emphasize, scrutinize the channels and the flows, work out what they're trying to do and why they're trying to do it. And therefore, we can set our global asks based on the needs more specifically. Okay, climate finance is more than just the numbers. So the 100 billion was a political compromise and it was emblematic. And the idea was to signal that there would be support for climate action undertaking in developing countries. It's clear from the slide I presented to you earlier that the flows are much less than the needs, and this 100 billion is much less than the needs of developing countries. You know, the broad transitions that we need across energy, industry, transport, food are going to be much, much more likely in the trillions. And so we need to think about the best way to unlock those trillions with the public flows that we have. And we need to make sure it's getting to the countries and the people who need it. So the Paris Agreement, as well as kind of repeating the 100 billion goal, also tried to prioritize the needs of least developed countries, small island developing states as those most vulnerable. And there are other principles that guide climate finance. The understanding that women and men, largely due to their gender roles and respective rights or lack thereof, have different vulnerabilities to climate change. And they also have different capabilities to mitigate emissions. And adapt with impacts. So there are a number of elements underneath climate finance that are much more qualitative in nature that we need to consider when we're looking at these flows. And this is why climate finance research has kept me busy for a decade. It's a lens to look at many topics. And so it's important that I urge you all to remember that it's more than just a number. So I'm going to move on to the second piece, and that is what is Article 2, Paragraph 1C. So there are 3 goals of our Paris Agreement, our International Climate Change Treaty that we set in 2015. You might have heard of the first 2. They broadly relate to mitigation and to adaptation. But the third long-term goal remains central to the success. It remains central to achieving our mitigation and adaptation goals. Specifically, this third long-term goal, Article 2, Paragraph 1C, aims to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change in the context of sustainable development, in the context of efforts to eradicate poverty by making finance flows consistent with a pathway to low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. Despite its elevation up there to one of the long-term goals, it's not really been discussed that much, and it's only become more popular to discuss it in the last couple of years. There isn't a standing agenda item at COP or under CMA, and we don't yet have any guidance on how to implement Article 2.1c. As such, it remains a little bit unclear how we do it and how we achieve it. So why is it important to discuss? So the third long-term goal really did break new ground back in 2015, and it was before its time because it recognizes the full effort when it comes to financing climate action. So it recognized that this was about shifting the trillions and not just the billions. All finance and all financial incentives, the rules, the regulations, the policies that make it flow will all need to drive towards climate action. And this also means that a sole focus on the positive climate finance flows are going to be insufficient to meet the overarching objectives of the Paris Agreement. If I continue only to work and track the positive climate finance flows that we see, I'm going to miss the bigger picture of the fossil fuel financing, for example. G20 economies are providing over 500 billion a year for fossil fuels. And you think of that in relation to the estimates that I showed you earlier of how much global totals are, around 800 billion, or the flow from developed to developing countries, which is more than 83 billion a year. So discussions in 2023 are likely to ramp up on Article 21C. And why is this? So firstly, the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement will conclude in Dubai this year. This is a 5-year cyclical process that's outlined in Article 14 of the Paris Agreement. And the objective is to raise climate ambition by assessing our collective progress. Collective is a very important word here. What is our collective progress towards the goals that are outlined in the Paris Agreement? And with that collective process, how can countries then update their nationally determined contributions and enhance international cooperation? As part of that global stocktake, we are talking about finance, and that's means of implementation and support, so the flows from developed to developing countries, but also the achievement of Article 21C and the climate consistency of finance flows. Although recently in Bonn, the balance between those two pieces of the finance puzzle did become political again, with decisions still yet to be made as to how those two very different elements will be reflected in the final global stocktake. A second piece is that the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan that came out of Egypt in COP27 has set the stage to have 2 workshops on Article 21C this year. And the idea being just to exchange views and enhance our understanding of what actually is the scope of Article 21C and how is it complementary to the provision of climate finance. And it's worth noting in this regard that the cover text from Egypt went much further and actually called for the reform of the international financial system and architecture. And this links us to some of the other debates that we're seeing outside of the multilateral process, including the Paris summit last week, including MDB reform, including big challenges around debt sustainability, so on and so forth. Finally, Article 21C is also being discussed in the context of the NCQG, which I will talk about later. Okay, so what are the opportunities and what are the challenges for Article 21C? Firstly, it allows for a more holistic consideration of said before, it allows us to everything that sets the rules and sets the incentives for our finance to flow. This means we can talk to central banks. This means we can talk to corporates. This means we can talk to institutional investors to make sure they shift their practices. It also allows us to look and see where the wider inequities in the financial system are popping up. If the cost of capital are just too high for developing countries to take climate action, where can we address that in the system? And it's not just enough to going to be provide concessional finance to try and de-risk some of these investments. And finally, implementation of Article 21C could make climate finance more effective. If you're going to support a country, put in place enabling policies, enabling environments, shift tax and subsidy regimes, it could therefore make the provision of climate finance much more effective in achieving its goals. But first, we have to address those challenges. We don't have common understanding or scope of what it entails. And without that, it's very hard to get started on implementation. One of the biggest criticisms that's very, very valid is that the pursuit of shifting all finance flows will detract from our provision from developed countries to developing countries. And there's also this argument about double standards. If you're going to make us do it in a developing country, what are you going to do at home? You can't tell us to change your fossil fuel subsidies and continue to fund fossil fuel subsidies at home. So we need to make sure that action happens on all fronts and is led by developed countries, even though we're seeing a lot of action on this in developing countries too. And finally, the challenge is that the multilateral system, the UNFCCC process, cannot deliver a formal mandate to the breadth of actors that are going to be. We can't tell central banks what to tell the Financial Stability Board what to do. However, it's going to be really important that we send strong signals asking them for reform and putting them in the right direction. What might the implementation of Article 21C look like? So in the spirit of helping countries take ownership and determine how to finance their own pathways, in 2018, quite some time ago now, a framework was developed by a number of NGOs that tried to look at the actions that government actors could take to really try and shift some of these finance flows in pursuit of Article 21C. And these were using well understood government levers. So financial policy and regulation. This could relate to your central bank and encouraging them to support financial inclusion or disclosure of climate risks, which we know are material risks to the economy and to businesses. It also includes fiscal policy levers. And this is not just reforming fossil fuel subsidies, but it could also consider water pricing. It could consider fertilizer pricing and subsidies on fertilizers. It also could consider tax exemptions for hurricane shutters. and things like this. So there's a lot that we could do with fiscal policy levers. There's also public finance. We can encourage direct investments, and there's also information instruments. So having a policy, having a plan, including a climate change plan and policy for a particular country, also signals to private actors the direction that we want the economy to take. And all of this will influence private finance flows and ideally push all investments towards Paris alignment. So some others have also made efforts to try and track how climate action is becoming more climate consistent. And again, I urge you to look at the work of the Standing Committee on Finance, which has written a couple of reports on this and have really kind of summarized the state of information that's out there. But a focus on actions like this that are nationally driven and determined are really good conversation starters. We're not trying to make Article 21C confrontational, and we really need to speak to the different development pathways that are sought and should be pursued under Article 2. One thing that I think is important is to remember is that Article 21C implementation is already underway. And there are a few front runners. I don't think there are any country that have climate consistent finance flows in their entirety. This slide shows you a couple of examples that stem from the finance working group of the Independent Global Stocktake, which has undertaken about 6 country case studies now that highlight different actions in the hope of stimulating national conversations. So the Rwandan government have innovative tax exemptions in order to promote solar panels being deployed off-grid. In Colombia, they put a carbon tax on fuels that created a voluntary carbon market. And some of these revenues could be used for other objectives, including environmental objectives and forestry in the case of Colombia. So there is a lot already underway. And what this framework is trying to do is to show countries they're already doing a lot towards Article 21C, but how can we support doing more towards Article 21C? Of course, it's going to be critical to address equity in implementation. I've already mentioned that we can't be hypocritical. We can't tell developing countries to do something and not do it at home. And that's going to be really important, therefore, that developed countries lead on Article 21C and seek to reform their financial policy regulation, fiscal policies, so on and so forth. This is especially true given that the poly crisis that countries are facing are leaving governments facing urgent fiscal and financial pressures. And this is leading to soaring sovereign indebtedness. And governments, houses, private actors face really high interest rates and high cost of living. And this is really challenging our ability to finance climate action and sustainable development. And we don't want countries to have to choose between the two. So ramping up of spending and investment in climate action, although challenging, is still going to be the best route to economic growth, development, and stability. But we need to put climate justice front and center. And that means in our pursuit of making finance flows climate consistent, in our pursuit of Article 21C, we're going to have to recognize countries' different starting points, countries' different endpoints, and the different pathways they're going to take to get there. Some countries won't be able to issue green bonds because they don't have a deep enough market. Some countries will need to focus on micro and small medium enterprises and shifting the way they invest, while others might need to think about how to shift investments from multinational corporations. Some countries have coal, oil, gas reserves, and others have plentiful renewable energies and no coal, oil, and gas. So every country's pursuit of Article 21C is going to look different. And the key is therefore protecting those the most vulnerable from bearing the highest cost of this pursuit towards Article 21C. All right. So my last set, the final thing I'm going to talk about is the NCQG. So what does this horrible acronym stand for? It is the New Collective Quantified Goal. And the objective is to achieve the Paris Agreement's purpose and also support the implementation of the convention. And as I noted on the previous or the earlier slide, it's the successor to the 100 billion goal. Formal deliberations began on the NCQG, the new goal, back in 2021, where it was decided that there were going to be a whole series of technical expert dialogues, 12 in total, over a 3-year period. And those have been happening. We're on TED 6, was just held in Bonn in June 2023. And the idea would be that before 2025, so we can expect next year, the COP in 2024, we should have an agreement on this new goal. Over the past decade, the climate finance community has been very good and has developed a bad habit of reporting everything that's wrong about climate finance, the way we don't have definitions or the way we can't count and the way we don't have enough data. But we focused a lot less attention on how to get it right. Well, maybe that's not entirely true, but this is a call to action to improve this new climate finance goal. We've got 18 months left. What elements do we want to be part of this goal? And what options would we like to put forward to make climate finance of the future better than climate finance of the past? The figure on the slide illustrates some of the different elements that might be addressed during deliberations. Some of these more traditional ones are issues that have been around since the 2009 Copenhagen Accord. Access to climate finance. What is climate finance? What is the total target? What kind of financial instruments? How much should be grants? How much should be concessional loans? And who is going to be contributing towards that goal? And this argument about developed and developing countries, and are they the same now as they were in 1992? There are some non-traditional elements. So for example, loss and damage financing has come up very strongly on the agenda, rightly so. But should that be included in the new goal, or should that be held separately under the loss and damage fund and other mechanisms for financing? And of course, consistency, which is shorthand for Article 2.1c here. Now you'll see that some of these are qualitative elements and some of them are quantitative elements. So in the title, in the acronym, we need to set a quantity for the total goal. But under that, we might have a number of qualitative goals that are going to be really important. They might speak to local level access, for example. They might speak to gender elements. They might speak to ratios in financial instruments. Some of these elements are going to be trickier to deliberate than others. Particular contributor based, just like I said, we're having the discussions now about who should contribute and should we change the basis. There are some developed countries that have higher ability to pay, even if they don't have as much historical responsibility for climate change. Of course, conversations about a new climate finance goal are not going to happen in a vacuum. Parties negotiating positions are now very informed by the wider economic and social priorities. We're talking a lot about debt sustainability, about economic competitiveness, trade, geopolitical relations, and in particular, the devastating impacts of COVID-19 are going to shape these deliberations on the goal. So what are the opportunities for the NCQG? We can avoid ill-defined targets of the past, which is where we started this discussion today. We can ensure that that goal is about more than just money. The 100 billion was very simply reduced to money, although there were some other principles that were included in Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, as I mentioned. We can make sure that the new goal rebuilds trust in the multilateral system. The ongoing failure of developed countries to meet the 100 billion has really eroded trust. We need to get that back on track, and we need to design a new system that really helps developing countries really achieve these very, very deep, very, very disruptive transformations to society and economies. And finally, we can make sure that the new goal innovates and is really fit for purpose for today and for the future. But what are the challenges? As I said, very low level of trust right now. It's plaguing our negotiations. We really need to rebuild that trust, have some serious commitments from some of the biggest economies in the biggest developed countries that are at the table. We're also facing a nothing is agreed till everything is agreed. So while we might have 3 years of discussions on the NCQG, we're not going to be able to agree anything until right at the end, which means it's going to be a very intense period of deliberations right at the end. And what we need now is civil society in particular to put forward some really concrete options. This is not about throwing the kitchen sink and throwing every single wish list you had about climate finance in. It's about creating some very clever options, thinking about their sequencing, thinking about their scope in order to create a better climate finance goal that we're going to be able to monitor, revise, and will actually lead to effective action going forward. We must remember the challenge is that these are politically charged arguments as they are technical, and there might be trade-offs between different elements, and we can also think through what those are going to have to be. And the final challenge is this lack of clarity as the new goal relates to this broader goal to make all finance flows consistent, and whether or not we should just stick to the provision of climate finance flows from developed to developing, or talk more broadly about Article 2.1c, given as it's not really embedded in many other places. on the UNFCCC agenda. So I'm sorry if I've gone on too long. This is my final remark. We need to do something differently. You can see we're really far below needs when we talk about financing climate action. We need this holistic vision. We can't just focus on the positive climate finance flows. We need to really think about what all actors can do in a coordinated manner. The financial system is interlinked. Doing one thing on its own is not enough. We need to do many things all at once and quite quickly to deliver the change we need, particularly in supporting allocation of scaled up capital to developing countries that does not push them further into unsustainable debt. And we also need to reallocate capital towards climate solutions. And this is talking to corporates, financial institutions, and through the policies and regulations of countries. So there really are opportunities for civil society to rally around a clear and unified path forward that was focused on solutions and not on the problems. And there's a danger if that we do not all push in the same direction, we are actually going to be the ones that are blocking negotiations and hindering our progress going forward. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Those are some amazing insights. I'm going to share screen now so everyone can see the Mentimeter. So if the audience has any questions for our speaker, please go to this Mentimeter and use a code 75492817. So you can ask questions directly to Charlene and she will try to answer it now. But let's be quick because I have little time to continue. And yeah, just to add on some reflections and we need the solutions that are restorative and systemic transformative and to transform systems as well. And of course, all actors must be in, and that this must not delay the negotiations where we need it. So let me see if we have some questions. I don't see any questions for the audience. Everyone is yeah, I think there's a very complex topic, and we invite others as well to also keep in touch with the finance and markets working group, because we touch these topics and do regular capacity buildings on these issues. And as you can see, you will have access to this presentation, and you can access our submissions on Article 21.c, as well as this is actually our latest submission. We finished it yesterday. So of course it would have been nice to have a chat with Charlene to discuss our points, but now it's too late because it's already on the UNFCCC platform. But yeah, anyways, we also had MDB reforms submissions. I mean, not a submission, but a position for the World Bank and the spring meetings, and the NCQG, the technical expert dialogue submissions for our process that just went during the SPs. And Article 21.c will be discussed for the very first time in a broad level with all stakeholders in the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogues that will be held in Bangkok next month. So we also invite our audience to stay in touch. We'll provide some links to watch virtually, and also through our working group, we can also support what our youngsters are going to be doing in terms of lobbying. I see no questions, so we thank you so much, Charlene, for your presentation, for your insights, and this amazing overview of the climate finance, so we can continue our lobby work. And you can see the screen right now changing. Yes, okay, great. So just give me 1 second. All right. All right, friends, so please go to the Menti again and prepare questions for our next speaker, so we don't have the same we can have questions beforehand, so we can be answering afterwards. So go to the Mentimeter, prepare it, and then let's listen what the Veronica, I don't want to butcher the name, Yakarazi, who has a vast experience and 14 years in environmental policy and planning, climate change management, and diplomacy. There are questions in the Menti. Wait, sorry. my team is telling me that there are questions in the Menti. I seem to have an outdated version. Maybe our friend Fred, can you show the Menti to see if someone can share the No, I see no questions. What are you saying, friends? All right. Yeah, no one is seeing any questions, so I'm sorry for that. We will continue with the presentation.
Yeah, I can see some questions. Do you want me to run through them and see if I can answer any of them? Just
so they're
off
okay.
cuff?
They're in yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right. I'm sorry, I'm going to be reading at the same time as thinking, so I apologize. How will climate finance flows be monitored to ensure that they're used transparently and for the right purpose? This is a great question. This is, again, our opportunity to improve the transparency systems that we have. So there is an enhanced transparency framework that was designed and developed under the Paris Agreement. We've also got biennial update reports that look at national communications that look backward at what's happening. And then we have NDCs, adaptation communications that look forward in terms of what countries need. So in a sense, we have a number of parameters that will show us what countries want. And through some of the data sources, the public reporting in particular, through the OECD, through the MDBs, through the climate funds, we can do a little bit of matching. In terms of the private flows, it's much, much harder. But how could we design a transparency system going forward that will better allow us not just to see how much money is flowing, but whether that money is actually making any difference to mitigation and adaptation in the future? It's an excellent question. And again, it's our opportunity to now to design a system that's much, much better. Is there a way that countries are taken into account for the grants given to them towards climate finance? So there is a priority given to least developed countries and small island developing states. But in terms of the prioritization, it either happens on a country perspective. For example, some countries give bilaterally, and they choose the partners that they give to, and some of them therefore choose to give to small island developing states, for example, Australia and the Pacific Islands. And many of those are grants. So some countries give only grants. A lot of the UK's climate finance is grant-based only, whereas Japan, for example, Canada and France, they tend to give much more finance on a repayment basis, even if it is concessional loans. So countries are taken into account. We know in the Paris Agreement that we're supposed to provide a lot of adaptation finance as grants. Sorry, I'm talking really fast. I apologize to the translators. Why is China out of providing climate finance? So there's some interesting analysis that's coming out now on the contributor base. If you look at the gross national income and the historical emissions of countries that were bucketed in the developed country bucket or the Annex 2 bucket back in 1992, as to them being responsible for providing climate finance, by those same measures today, China still does not fall into the bucket of being required to provide climate finance. However, what's also important to note is that China does provide a lot of climate finance. It's just not reported. There's no obligation for China to report right now, which comes all the way back to our transparency question at the beginning as to how to set the right incentives for countries. And of course, that reporting comes with a lot more scrutiny and a lot more accountability of what's being funded. So a lot of these issues are going to be very interlinked. How can an average person with no background in finance contribute in this space? And I think that was the kind of the point I was getting at, is that we need to be really clear about their asks. Firstly, I would encourage you to learn about it. It's a fascinating topic and it never gets boring. I think we should all be asking for the right things from our own governments. I live in a developed country. We've just passed a new climate change law here in Switzerland. We need to put pressure on the government to deliver that. So pressuring your governments, your local governments, your national governments is the best way to do this, because the multilateral system is a good signal, but ultimately we're going to need domestic change. How can we make sure the funding gets to the people? Again, this is really important. How do we work to get local level access to the people who know what to do with it and need it most? And this, to me, is about risk taking. So we as taxpayers need to allow our money to be provided in the most risk-taking way. And that might be getting it down to very small local communities without a bank account or without, 10 years of institutional experience and accountants that are working for them. And that requires that we take more risk with our money that includes our taxpayers' money. So it is difficult. We are going to have to take risks. And that means we also have to learn very carefully from what worked well so we can replicate it. I'm going to pause there. There are more questions, but I'm sure that Gen wants to move on. So thanks a lot.
No, I would like to keep the whole day talking about climate finance. That'll be great. No, but we have another speaker waiting as well. And yeah, thank you so much, Charlene, again for all your insights. They were tremendous. All right, so now back to our presentation. We got here it is. So we got Veronica Gundogiarati. Thank you so much for being here, Veronica. So Veronica, like I was saying, has vast experience in 14 years on environmental policy and planning, climate change and management and diplomacy. She was also the gender and climate change thematic coordinator for the group of 77 plus China, as well as the mitigation lead coordinator for Africa. She was also the climate finance, development finance expert and sustainable strategist, and she served as a deputy director in the climate change management department of Zimbabwe as the manager for climate finance and sustainability in the Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe. Now, Veronica works at the head of the Climate Finance Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund. Oh, wow. That was a long introduction. But we are deeply honored to have you with us, Veronica. And the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Guy. And thanks to Charlene for providing the background to climate financing. I'll provide an overview of climate funds, specifically focusing on the Green Climate Fund. And I'll give an overview in terms of the climate finance landscape, and then the Green Climate Fund accreditation requirements, the focus areas, the investment frameworks, and the overview of the adaptation fund. So we have basically the bilateral and multilateral financing, which looks at what the GCF does, which is the multilateral system. And then, of course, your bilateral partners like Germany through GIZ, that could be your potential bilateral partner, or the United Kingdom through FCDO. So in terms of the overview of the climate finance landscape, on the next slide, I'll move on to the next slide on the global landscape. Yes. So in terms of the overview of the climate finance landscape, this is a really exciting overview, as it really demonstrates on how climate finance is flowing in terms of the mechanisms and the type of instruments, as well as the sources of financing. So you realize that we have different sources of financing apart from the flows from the national governments, but we also have financial flows even through project-based financing and private sector financing. And the greatest part of financing is also private sector based, flowing through project development and corporate actors as well. And I think that is why it is important to then say, how do we use the public sector financing to unlock private sector financing, and also to make it flow to where it is needed the most. And I think Charlene has already alluded to some of the responses to that effect, including designing and also the ongoing process of realigning the MDBs into a more effective entities that support country needs. In terms of the agencies, we have development finance institutions, national bilateral and multilateral institutions. We also have development partners, commercial financing institutions, and these are some of the agencies that support climate financing. But also, what is more important important is then to understand how this financing is flowing. So we have different financing instruments, which can be either debt financing, grant financing, equity financing, or guarantee financing. And you realize that most of the financing in 2015, it was through balance sheet financing. So it was largely project-based financing, but at the backdrop of organizational balance sheet financing. So it means that there was really need to demonstrate that you'll be able to pay back, whether it was debt or loan funding that was channeled to you. And in terms of the recipients, it was largely the private sector and then, of course, the public sector. And also then, to what extent were those finances used? Very limited financing was flowing to adaptation and also cross-cutting issues. The greater part of financing went into mitigation, and within the mitigation sector, it was largely the renewable energy sector. So you realize that a lot of research and development has been done in the renewable energy space, and there was significant growth between 2014 and 2016 in terms of renewable energy access. But there was a shift if you move into the 2019-2020 climate finance landscape. So you realize that whilst there was a lot of project level market-based financing and balance sheet financing, but there was a huge shift in terms of financing sectors, that it moved largely from the renewable energy space, although it was still significant within the energy system space, both in terms of distribution and production, but also there was significant shift to the transport sector. So this was largely articulated and related to the growing electric vehicles and mass transport systems. So you realize that a lot of resources in the climate space are now beginning to move into e-mobility. So that's why most of the resources are beginning to flow into the transport sector in the recent past. And then in terms of the Green Climate Fund, this is a multilateral mechanism that is established under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it was established in 2010, where the first meeting was held in Cancun, but it officially became operative in 2012, and it approved its first projects in 2015. So it has 194 member states who are also parties to the NFCCC, and it is governed by a GCF board, the secretariat, and also the independent units that look at the issues around integrity, as well as monitoring and evaluation issues. The mandate of the Green Climate Fund is likely to promote low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development in developing countries. So it actually defines some of the issues that we highlighted in terms of what is climate finance. So it has that notion that it is flowing into developing countries. So in terms of the key steps for the Green Climate Fund engagement, what is important is that countries should establish national designated authorities or focal points. These are the persons that are responsible for day-to-day communication with the Green Climate Fund, and also they should engage through country programs and also seek accreditation of entities to access resources from the fund. So for you to access resources from the Green Climate Fund, you have to be an accredited entity. And then also within the accredited entities, you need to develop projects and programs to bring forward funding proposals through accredited entities. And the challenge that we are currently facing is that there is a lot of accredited entities that successfully get accredited to the Green Climate Fund, but they then fail to meet the requirements in terms of developing quality projects and programs that are eligible for financing. And the different type of financing instruments that the Green Climate Fund is currently offering is looking at grants, loans, guarantees, and equity financing. And there is significant funding within the grants and loans financing space. In terms of the Green Climate Fund, national designated authorities' responsibilities, firstly is to convene national stakeholders to understand the type of projects that are being supported and the priorities that should be considered in any project that is being developed for the Green Climate Fund. Secondly, they are responsible for issuing what we call nomination letters for direct access. For example, if you're an entity, either a bank or an agency, and you want to be accredited to the Green Climate Fund, you have to get a letter of nomination from the NDA. And they are also responsible for issuing what we call no objection letters for projects or programs. So it means whatever program or project that goes through the Green Climate Fund has approval by the country in terms of its priorities and the work that it is going to do. So this is partly an issue of also safeguarding the resources that GCF is putting in countries. There's also they are also responsible for approval of readiness support. As the Green Climate Fund, they make an 1 million allocation to every developing country annually as part of readiness support. But also there is 3 million allocation for national adaptation planning. So the NDA is responsible to approve and allocate how this readiness support is used. Then the strategic oversight in terms of alignment to national priorities. So they also ensure that whatever activities being implemented or supported by the Green Climate Fund is in line with national blueprint and development strategies. So there are different roles and responsibilities.
Now, I'm going to interrupt you one second because I think that we are frozen with one slide. So I will try to share my screen to continue. We were at this slide, folks, and I'm sorry for the technical problem, but now you can continue. I'm sorry.
Yes, so you can move to the next slide. So this is the role of the NDAs that I was explaining. So that we are able to flow, I'll be constantly saying next slide since I'm not showing my own slides due to a technical hitch. So we can move to the next slide, which speaks to the roles and responsibilities of accredited entities. Thank you very much. So in terms of the accredited entities, these are also nominated by the national designated authorities, and they have different responsibilities from the NDAs. So their role is to prepare projects in terms of aligning the projects with national priorities. They have to make sure that the projects respect country ownership, the project appraisal, structuring, supervision, and evaluation is in line with the Green Climate Fund requirements. They are also responsible for reporting in terms of fiduciary systems, so the amounts that they've been used for project implementation and also the activities that have been implemented against the timelines that the projects have been implemented. And we have a lot of different accredited entities, which include national accredited entities, such as the Ministry of Natural Resources of Rwanda. We also have regional accredited entities, such as the Development Bank of Southern Africa and also the Development Bank of Latin America. And then at international level, we have accredited entities such as the World Bank, KfW, and UNDP. So these are the international accredited entities. So the accredited entities can either be national, regional, or international. And for national, you also have to seek NDA approval for accreditation. In terms of the GCF portfolio dashboard, you realize that to date, there are 216 projects and 88 of those approved projects are in Africa, and the total value is over 45.1 billion. So it means whilst GCF is a total capitalization of 20 billion, a lot of resources have also come through in terms of co-financing and match making. And on the committed resources, the Green Climate Fund has committed up to $12 billion, and current implementation resources are 9.8, and the current disbursement is 3.5. And then already, if you look at the implementation and the disbursement, you see that the disbursement is less than half of what should be implemented, which means that GCF needs to improve its disbursement, or countries to improve their capacity to implement the Green Climate Fund program. So it means that there's a challenge that needs to be addressed in that front. Then also in terms of the beneficiaries, it is expected that 912 million beneficiaries would benefit from the current 216 projects that have been supported by the GCF, and over 2.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions equivalent are expected to be avoided based on the mitigation projects that have been approved. And to date, we have 13 regional, 8 national, and 42 international accredited entities. And I think there's now been a significant growth in terms of the national accredited entities. However, we still see that most of the financing is largely going to mitigation, with 60% of the projects being mitigation centered and 40% being adaptation. And then whilst we expect more grant financing for developing countries, and because there is this notion that developing countries should not be seen more indebted because of climate change, we still see that there is 41% grant financing, which is matching 41% loan financing. And then also there's been a growth in the equity financing space, and also minimal support in the results-based payments and guarantee financing. Next slide. In terms of the Green Climate Fund accreditation requirements, there are 3 requirements for you to be an accredited entity. And the first one focuses on the fiduciary systems, which basically looks at your financial management and accounting, your internal and external audit, as well as your control frameworks in terms of how do you assess risk, and also if in the event of fraud, do you have any investigation policies in place? And also, are your procurement guidelines above board, and do they fit international standards? Then the second component focuses on programming, where it is important to identify the challenges that the countries and communities are facing in regards to climate change. And then you prepare a proposal, and then it is appraised. And then also you're responsible for the implementation of the program, including providing project oversight and control, as well as monitoring performance of the implementation of the project, and of course, ensuring that upon monitoring and evaluation, you provide learnings to inform future programming, but you also disclose and report on impact generated by the projects. And the third component largely focuses on safeguards, and I think this has been a really learning curve as the Green Climate Fund also follows and learns from other institutions that had gone ahead of it. We have seen that in some countries there was a case where the solar system was actually destroyed by the community, maybe largely because they didn't understand what it was and its impact, because maybe of the absence of consultations. So it is important that we have safeguards to safeguard both the Green Climate Fund, the project implementer, as well as the project beneficiaries. And some of these safeguards also relate to environmental and social safeguards, including the labor issues, the biodiversity management issues, the issues of culture, as well as the issues that relate to energy efficiency and resource efficiency use. There's also the issue of governance in terms of organizational capacities and competences, and also the issues of gender and climate change. So to the extent of how many women or men are benefiting and how many youth are benefiting from each particular project. So the issue of gender mainstreaming is becoming very central in the Green Climate Fund projects. So in terms of understanding the Green Climate Fund, is what we call fit for purpose accreditation. So if you want to be an accredited entity, you then need to explore your organizational capacities in terms of what you are able to be accredited for. So what they have done is they have split their accreditation processes, first to look at what we call fiduciary functions, whether you want to be accredited for basic accreditation or specialized accreditation. Specialized accreditation, it means it is an upper end of programming and upper end of ensuring safeguards. So it really then governs the rate at which you are able to to access and manage Green Climate Fund risks and implementation. Then it also has the environmental and social safeguards category. So for projects, especially in the infrastructure sector, it's usually a high because it can include displacement of communities. And we know that this has to be handled with much care, and it needs to ensure that the communities that are benefiting or that have been moved do not become worse off after project implementation, but they are also secured and their lives are better, or they remain the same. So that is one of the issues that they also focus on. So you should be able to say, in terms of safeguards, are you in the lower tier or in the upper tier? And do you have the capabilities to manage high risk environmental and social issues? And then in terms of the project size, they have what we call micro program or micro project size, which is about 10 million. And then the small size is between 10 and 50 million, and the largest size is greater than 250 million. So as an entity, if you have at least 3 track record projects that you've implemented that are above 250 million, it means then you are eligible to apply for the large projects for implementation. So in terms of the fit for purpose, this is basically a summary of the overflow of what is then involved. So your basic fiduciary standards looks at your key administrative and financial capabilities, but your specialized fiduciary standards now have an upper tier. So for example, if you want to apply for on-lending, you have to demonstrate that you have a track record on on-lending. Or if you want to apply for grant management, it means you have to have clear grant management manuals and policies and demonstrate that you are able to handle such financing and the scale of the projects that you're applying for against your track record. So for accreditation, when you accredit to the Green Climate Fund, what is important is the track record. You need to demonstrate that you've managed such resources, you are aware of environmental and social issues, you are aware of gender considerations, and you are able to report to the GCF in terms of meeting those requirements. And in terms of the next slide, we have the different stages in the accreditation process. So the first stage is basically no objection and institutional assessment and readiness. So you basically apply to the GCF, they take you through a readiness check or qualification check to say, is your entity eligible to be accredited to the Green Climate Fund? And then if it's eligible, you get a no objection letter from your NDA, and then you continue to the next steps where you fill your assessment form, and then when it is done, they take it to the readiness stage where the Secretariat now reviews your application and indicate that you are ready for accreditation. So this is step one, which looks at institutional assessment in terms of your completeness, in terms of policy requirements. Do you have a gender policy? Do you have a procurement policy? Do you have risk management plans and all that? So they check your documentation and see if you qualify. And then the other element is the review and decision. So the accreditation secretariat recommends your application to the accreditation panel and technical experts on, and this is done on a needs basis. Then the accreditation panel and technical experts review the documents, and then they make a decision to say, yes, you qualify, or they feel that there are some track record that they still need you to complete, and then they'll send it back to you. And then the board then makes a decision based on the recommendation from the accreditation panel. And then stage 3 now looks at the final validation and legal arrangements, where you now sign a master implementation agreement with the Green Climate Fund in terms of how you're going to implement the project upon accessing their resources. So this is basically the 3 critical stages in the accreditation process for the Green Climate Fund. So what is also important is to understand the impact focus areas. And then this is in the next slide. where you look at mitigation strategic impacts. So in terms of the focus areas for mitigation, the reason why they are focused on mitigation is because of their potential to reduce carbon or greenhouse gas emissions. So we have energy generation and access, the transport sector in terms of e-mobility, and then also even biofuels. Then also the forest and land use in terms of its potential to sequester carbon, and also sustainable soil management under regenerative agriculture and other related technologies. And then the aspect of building cities, industries, and appliances in terms of the extent to which how they are energy efficient, how the buildings are designed, and also the extent to which they are low consumption. So in terms of resilience, as I move to the next slides to conclude, there's also different issues that speak to health, food, and ecosystems. And then the investment framework, it looks at your impact potential, the paradigm shift, the sustainable development potential, the needs of the recipients. So the reason why the financial flows should flow to the people that need them the most should actually be needs-based. So what are the needs of the recipients, the issues of vulnerability, and also ensuring that the marginalized access such resources. And of course, what the country is prioritized in terms of its climate action and the aspect of efficiency and effectiveness, including economic and financial soundness of the projects, remain very fundamental issues in the investment framework. There are quite a number of issues that are considered in project proposal development in the next slide. This includes the financing cost, the detailed project and rationale for the Green Climate Fund involvement, and then of course the risk assessment, as well as the important logical framework that focuses on results monitoring and reporting. So these are critical elements when you develop the project. There are quite a number of projects that have been approved. I will not speak through them because of time, but what I'll do, I think they'll circulate the presentation and you can familiarize with them as well. And these include both projects by national, multinational, international, and regional entities that are accredited to the Green Climate Fund, and they can be either adaptation, mitigation, or both mitigation and adaptation. And without wasting much time, I'll conclude by taking you through the requirements of the adaptation fund. And I think this is also a multilateral fund, just like the Green Climate Fund, but it's largely supporting developing country parties that are parties to the Kyoto Protocol and are particularly vulnerable. They support concrete adaptation activities. And the good thing is that they do not have any prescribed sectors. So as a country, you prioritize. It is a country-driven process, and they finance the full cost of adaptation, no co-financing requirements. If you co-finance, it is for the benefit of your organization or your country to ensure that you implement the project at scale. And 50% of their portfolio is currently direct access, which means they are really empowering countries so that they ensure that the benefits of their grant funding is really going to the communities rather than international administration related costs. Then also they have increased their allocations to countries. It used to be 10 million, so it has recently gone up to 20 million. So it means that for single country projects, you are able to do significant adaptation work, at least for $20 million. And then in terms of the different implementing entities as well, they have both national, multinational, and regional entities, and they are also receiving applications throughout the year on a rolling basis. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Veronica. Those were very insightful. We have some questions on the Menti while we put it on the screen. So there was one interesting question, and it's like, how can we make sure that the funding gets to the people? So if you can explain a little bit on how does the government apply for the funding, and how can maybe a stakeholder, civil society, get engaged in that process to apply for funding. The Green Climate
Yes.
Fund.
Thank you very much. So what the Green Climate Fund has done is to put what we call soldiers, and those soldiers are your national designated authorities who guard against projects that do not benefit the country in terms of national priorities, but also in terms of the recipient needs. So as youth and also as non-governmental organizations, what is important is to closely liaise and relate with your NDAs so that whenever a project is evaluated, you also have a say in terms of the extent to which the resources mobilized will benefit an ordinary person or the marginalized and vulnerable communities on the ground. So it is important to have a voice during evaluation of the projects that are supported by the Green Climate Fund. And I also recommend that you do that even in advance, to express interest that anytime you send projects to the it could be Global Environmental Facility Adaptation Fund or Green Climate Fund. We are interested to be the stakeholders and also to evaluate and assess the impact and the beneficiaries of those projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That means we also have to be observers in those processes and not just follow the negotiations, but also how the funds actually get decided to stand for the needs of our communities. I think we're a little bit on the time, so we're gonna maybe read one last question. My cat keeps coming in the way. So is there any example or good practice in how climate finance provided the condition of a certain living or a certain place? Can you maybe remind? Can you maybe tell us of a best practice of somewhere where the fund had been implemented and had helped the public and private relationships and like help the communities and help in social aspects as well?
Yes, thank you very much. I saw a colleague asking about helping their country, and I think they are from Rwanda. I'll really present a good learning case from Rwanda for NERA. In terms of how they have used the Green Climate Fund to unlock both public and private sector financing. And they've also used it to scale up the adaptation needs and even empower women. So they have really taken the gender elements into consideration, and we are seeing significant financing also supporting women, and also we are seeing a lot of resource mobilization through innovative financing coming from FONERA. So they use a lot of public financing to mobilize private sector financing and design different innovative tools that are relevant to actually support and benefit their communities. So FONERA in Rwanda is one of the good case studies that I can really think of, because they have clear lessons. They've even done sectorial approach where they have themes to say, for example, if it's health and water issues, they can put up a call specifically to address a climate related issue from a health and water management perspective. So you then realize that because they do open calls and they have a clear process of how to select the winning entities, which will then actually implement these projects in marginalized communities, then creates the value for money and a good value proposition for every project that is being implemented.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. That was very insightful. Thank you very much, Veronica. That actually helps a lot our Latin American friends here who are in their ARCOI. They're thinking on doing a statement this year based on best practices, and there's a working group on climate finance. Actually, many of our audience are also from there. Thank you very much for your time, Veronica. Now we'll have to go to some 5-minute break so we can be prepared for the next part. So thank you very much, everyone. We can now take a rest a little bit so we can continue afterwards. So go grab some coffee, some tea, go hug your mom, your cats, your your dogs, do whatever you like. See you later.
Hi everyone. So I hope that you had a good 5-minute break, because our youth speaker today is the most popular, the most beloved, and in my opinion, he's the most hardworking global youth champion. I'm speaking for the whole team when I say that his presence on our team is priceless. We all love his energy and his intellect, and for good reasons too. He's going to be speaking to us about the Youth Action Fund initiative, and he has a special activity on Mentimeter planned. Hinaro, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Luigi. Yeah, okay, I'm excited for this. First, okay, I'm going to share a little bit my screen. So, hello everyone, you might already know. So here it is. So hi, my name is Jan. I'm just gonna mention a little bit of next climate finance events that are coming, because it's really important that we take a look at this and we also participate. And I invite you to join our working group at Youngo, so we can all join together and raise the voice of the youth to have our inputs and taking place into this events and actually shape the policies that are going to be implemented. So first of all, the forum of a standing committee on financing just transitions is going to take place in Bangkok next month, during the 17th and 18th of July. And then we're going to have the first workshop under the Sharm el Sheikh dialogue. This is going to touch specifically at what I was saying, the Article 21.c, and in accordance to Article 9, which is the relationship between Global North and Global South countries. And there's going to be the 31st Standing Committee on Finance meeting, which our next speaker is also going to talk about what the Standing Committee on Finance does and how the hell. Yeah. So first, before I talk about our initiative on the fund, I wanted to speak about some political positions that we have built with our friends during the years, and especially in the recent months on the coming work of the working group. And I wanted to say that starting on some positions, and according to the IPCC report, an article, and on the assessment report 6, synthesis report, we need to reach peak emissions by 2025. That's less than 3 years. That's less than 2 years, sorry, and then half them by the end of the decade. And even that means that half of the world population by the end of the decade, that's 4 billion people, will still be vulnerable to the climate and ecological emergency. That means that even if we mitigate as much as we have to reach the Paris Agreement, we must save lives and do enough efforts in our communities to create resilience and to overcome all these extinction threats and push the shift forward to trillions before the decades to do so. So we need a new climate finance goal that actually meets the financial needs of developing countries and injects the resources to the most vulnerable communities. On the way to 2025, we need to negotiate a successor of the failed 100 billion goal. The technical expert dialogues for the new collective quantified goal ended up with tons of open questions and opposing positions. So I share that perspective with a colleague that we need to bring solutions that doesn't actually put the negotiations at a halt. So we need to really figure out who provides the sources of funding and how does this financial flow can align with the climate goals under the context of the reform of the international architecture and the multi-bilateral banks reform. And a lot of work must be done until COP29 to ensure the right track to achieve the new collective quantified goal that will enable the world to meet the Paris Agreement and adjust in an equitable manner while being flexible and adaptive enough so all countries and no one be left behind. And as a core of the goal, we need public grants-based finance to access especially loss and damages, adaptation, and biodiversity conservation and restoration, as well as a debt crisis. This is crucial as many countries face a colonial-grown debt crisis that strangles them to achieving sustainable development. This is the case for Argentina, from our friends, for example, where the country just cannot focus on a long term because they have to pay the debt that the capitalist system has been pushing countries to think in short terms, and the Global North has the responsibility to immensely accelerate grant-based finance and find solutions in this regards together. Parties need to be held accountable. On top of that, we must shift all financial flows. The money must make sense with actually the limitary planetary boundaries in a holistic and profound manner. And therefore, we must be part of the discussion. We must do our part to bring our positions and convince stakeholders and work together without shaming or harassing anyone, because this world has been made by the incentives that we have created to be. So just to look at it as a systemic problem and find the right solutions in a very short time, because time is ticking, and we need a system transformation approach to get out of this ecological and climate crisis. So we have one initiative that we've been working on the past months, and we have many people on board, and we're most than happy to bring more people if you guys are also interested. And it's called the Race to Empowerment. This was initially going to be proposed as a campaign for the high-level climate champions. Now we're looking at things, and maybe it might be under some of the campaigns that are ongoing, but the governance system of what we want for a youth action fund that we talk about a lot during the SBs and during the other sessions must be done in a common built position way. So every youth must come together and reach consensus as what the governance of a youth action fund must look like. So again, on the Global Youth Coalition, we met together at COP27 after some of us meeting during the way of going to COI and going to COP. And we brainstormed a lot on how can we bring more organizations together to work for common goals, finding synergies between those organizations, doing less double work, and actually leaving all the egos behind and just like collaborating, you know, like bringing information and share it with the ones that need it to, so they can also bring the initiatives that they have to implement in their communities. So a little perspective on this approach. The science is clear, and our perspective coming from youth is that, for example, in the IPCC last assessment report, we know that some loss and damages are inevitable. We are experiencing acceleration in current and losses and damages that will affect our health and well-being, water availability, food production, our cities, our settlements, our infrastructure, the biodiversity in our ecosystems. This will be highly accelerated if we don't act, and our generations will be the responsible to rebuild human settlements and regenerate those ecosystems. So we need to move quickly in order to create the capacities to implement solutions to survive the crisis. And we also need an enabling environment. That means that we can count with everything that we need, and we don't expect, for example, to have a PhD in order to design a project to then put it on a Green Climate Fund and then to think that we can help our communities. We need better approach. And as you can see in this graph, we are it's definitely our experience and like how we're living is a loss and damage itself. Like we're not gonna have the same privileges that last generations had. So everyone must work together to bridge the gaps to secure a safe and just resilient development for all. And our generations will be the leaders of these challenges. And so investing in them can assure that we are prepared to fit this immense task that will ultimately define the future of our humanity. So the problem is that even if it's imperative that significant youth involvement in the climate dialogues and implementation of the agendas are needed, we need increased youth accessibility to the conferences. Not even us contact points have any, any support most of the time to go to the conferences. I had to get in debt, for example, to go to SBs. But in order to do so, we need the right incentives and an enabling environment and create also synergies between advocacy groups and academic know-how. Scientists, academia, NGOs, everyone needs to work together. And when we talk about youth empowerment, it's not that youth doesn't have power. Youth has an immense power, but the power is not catalyzed enough to properly influence the transformation of our system. And that's what we're advocating for. So there are some barriers to access climate finance, for example, and we have studied this in our reports and in the working group. There are bureaucratic processes, there's a slow learning curve and some capacities that not everyone has the privilege to have, as well as language barriers, misinformation, miscommunication, tokenism, for example. We need to be involved in the table and negotiating and implementing, but not just be there and sitting there and taking a photo. We need to be part of all the process, and we also have to you have to be facilitating a process where we can contribute meaningfully and substantially at the technical level, just as all the different stakeholders are doing. And for that, we need the aid and we need to work together with academia. So the opportunity is that we see what the trends are saying. The race to zero, the race to resilience, the power of non-state actors, the power of technology, monitoring and data analysis, international cooperation, partnership, international commitments, the transition to a clean energy and how this is getting ever more accessible for our communities. So, for example, there's going to be new technologies on solar panels coming the last year, which are going to be more cheap, and they're going to be more effective, at least 250%, for example, I've read. So it's really important that we look at these trends and prepare and invest at the right time and be coordinated in order to reach this development to our communities. Also the power of youth and public mobilization. So youth are hungry and to learn and ready to implement these actions. This is an example of the dashboard of the application of this exact program that you guys are. And during the applications in 1 month, we received 10,000 applications and without spending one dime in marketing. And the results of this report said that 64% were coming from most affected people in areas. 88 of you already are affected by climate change, and there's a big knowledge gap of 82% of you also report having a level of 5 and below. 5 or below level of understanding of UNFCCC processes. That means that you haven't been capacitated to understand negotiations or the UNFCCC framework, or haven't had the opportunity or the privilege to participate in one of the negotiations. So this is really bad, and we need to really bridge the gap if we want to all of us to be on board and to really be able to influence this. So in terms of implementation, more than 5,000 youth-led projects were submitted as well, and 3,800 of you also said that your projects are replicable. That means that there's a huge opportunity of all of you working together in order to accelerate action and make sure that other communities are also on board at the same level that you guys are. And that's where we want to work with you together in this initiative. So the solution is enhancing the climate governance for youth through a youth action fund. Basically, this want to be another campaign like similar to the ones of the high-level climate champions, but to enable the environment to act with the most affected by climate change, focusing on capacity building and reconstructing human settlements, and also mitigation and adaptation. So this is a list of, for example, stakeholders and how they would collaborate with each other inside working groups. That one working group will focus on advocacy. So getting people that are following negotiations, for example, the contact points, and other people from Youngo and other for example, other constituencies outside the UNFCCC as well. We need to have sense with the SDGs. We need to have sense with ECOSOC and development, and also why not like youth movements as well. So they can bring political positions, which are really important, and these political positions must be translated into technical language, aided by academics and experts and NGOs, so we can also contribute to reports and put it in as for the Secretariat to also use and include to the reports that they give to countries, and also shape the questions that are done in, for example, the workshop when we get the solutions all together. So contribute to positions are the outputs, strategic lobbying are outputs, and also reports are outputs. And in the middle of this, there's an information and platform app that we need to see what everyone is doing, right? And as well as having a working group focused on fast-paced youth-led projects implementation that will understand the projects that are good and create capacities and focus on data consolidation and channelize funding to where it's needed. So for example, we have one research group that is already doing their work right now to design and be part of this process, so we can focus first we're focusing first on Latin America to set up a way forward, and then we're going to expand all over the world, and we expect to do this as fast as possible. So the group is the research group could be identifying youth-led high impact projects, refining the best practices to implement this, or best practices of all those projects, creating a suite of thematic indicators to measure data and the impacts, and linking that to developing theories of change. That means, how do we actually get to where we want to go in terms of activities, in terms of the outputs that we need in order to achieve these goals that are very global. For example, in the race to resilience, you have saving 4 billion lives by the end of the decade, but how you do it is actually very more complex and has a lot of indicators that are associated to that theory of change. So we have to also design a robust methodology to gather the impact of this project, so everyone can be part of the data gathering as well. So we implement the projects and we make sure that we report it back to the platform, so we can consolidate the data with the team and advocate for more increasing access to climate finance for youth. So the wheel just keeps going, and we receive even more access to climate finance in the future. Some workflow, for example, we're going to analyze the 5,000 projects, define forms in order to contact with you guys that are doing the action on ground, to analyze the impacts and the replication processes, get feedbacks from experts, one way and then to the other, and then contact again the organization, send the forms, organize interviews with the organizations and impacts, and assess replication, and meeting with capacity building experts to refine these training programs that will lead other youth to implement these projects in their territories. Meeting with them to also make sure that these indicators and theories of change are ready to be shared, send a campaign to send this to all organizations, and then report the data back to COP28, for example, so we can have and actually ask for more access to climate finance, but with the numbers that we need to have and build together. For example, in a platform like this, that Samar beautifully did the concept of this platform, in order to also everyone to access this and to push our local governments and to push everyone and not just push to convince the co-benefits of this, and because it will ultimately help us all to survive the climate and ecological crisis. So as you can see, this would how a platform could look like, and this is a broad one pager of all the inputs that we have put together, and I'm going to cut now because we're definitely running out of time. But we have a the organization, that platform will focus on youth climate activists as one of the key stakeholders to inform, but also participate with other stakeholders. So we're going to have an activity where we want to gather inputs for the Youth Action Fund. And I'm going to pause now, and I want to know if we have a Mentimeter. Yeah, thank you so much. So the first question was, what would you need in order to implement a project in your communities? We have access to funds, even without one more year of practical experiences. Training for sustainable climate fund development, budgeting and resource allocation. I'm interested in contribute to the projects, access to grants, the right of people, a certain amount of fund, informal, formal government support, knowledge and finance, financial resources. These are very interesting. So we have another question as well, I think. Oh yeah, this one I just wanted to us to validate if a platform to access information and connect youth globally would be a good idea to accelerate advocacy and youth implementation of projects. And I want to know from you guys, because then our stakeholders, like, are you sure that the youth wants this? And we have to be there with numbers and rough data to do this. So yeah. we want to have some initial data right now, but we can continue also offline in the Terra platform and the emails, and to understand what are your perspective. How could, now that to a question, please answer this. How could a such platform benefit your project? Specifically, like I know you guys are doing terrific work on ground, or you're planning to do. So how could this will benefit you? It's also a question that we would love to have inputs for, to keep working on the design of our project. One question here is there international fund for climate change project carried out by young people? Yes, thank you for asking this, because we actually have 2 examples of great funds that are going to be implemented just in a few weeks or months. One is the Youth Climate Justice Fund, which is been working with the last group of advisory board of Antonio Guterres, and this will provide like $2 million for climate justice projects. So if you guys are interested in getting funds for your climate justice projects, we're going to send the information as soon as it's public. And the other initiative I wanted to mention is the Re-Earth initiative that our friend Chie is also going to implement. Yeah, we were going to send the link afterwards. So how would this platform benefit you? Connect with other people and create a community for collaborating with funding and coaching, how to manage administrative parts of projects, access to knowledge, network and learning opportunities, promoting youth actions and building channels of cooperation among various stakeholders. Really nice. It could help reach new stakeholders, share new opportunities, and reach a bigger crowd of activists, and that will ultimately help us gain visibility. It will target vulnerable and indigenous populations struggling with economic stability. That's a really important point. This fund must be for everyone, and this fund will also help to connect with each other. I love your answers, friends. We'll make sure to keep the conversation going so we can set the right governance system. So yeah, Luigi, I'll give the floor to you now, so we can give the introduction for our next speaker.
Okay, so our third expert speaker is going to be Hedrig Oliver. I'm not sure if I pronounced his name right or not, but Charlene mentioned that the Standing Committee on Finance, which is like responsible to create reports about climate finance to parties and non-party observers, and to talk about it, plus the role of the Climate Finance Secretariat. So for that, we have Hedrig. He's a program officer in the Climate Finance Subdivision at the UNFCCC. He supports the intergovernmental negotiations on climate finance, as well as the technical work under the Standing Committee on Finance, including the biennial assessment and overview of climate finance flows, definitions of climate finance, and like work related to Article 2, Paragraph 1 of the Paris Agreement, to make sure that the finance flows are consistent with the pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. He's previously worked on the development of innovative climate finance instruments, tracking climate investment flows and international climate policy at Climate Policy Initiatives, Climate Bond Initiative, and Eco FYS. Unfortunately, Pedro could not be here today, so we do have a recorded interview, which we'll play now.
Hello, Patrick. Thank you so much for having us at this early time. We really wanted to meet someone from the Secretariat to share some of the work that you guys are doing in terms of climate finance. and really understand what is the workflow going this year so we can prepare, as well as what are the technical aspects that the Secretariat do in order to cover all the climate finance topics. So thank you so much, and let's just dive in. Patrick, if you can introduce yourself for our youth audience, and then explain us a little bit what does cool mean, and what very cool name, and what is a Climate Finance Secretariat?
Thanks for having me. Very pleasure to be here. So my name is Padraig Oliver. I am one of the program officers here in the climate finance team at the Secretariat. We're the unit that supports the negotiation on climate finance issues every year at the COP. So there are many regular agenda items that come up that we support, and then there are other ones that are more ad hoc, you could say, that come up periodically, such as the new climate finance goal that is being discussed at the moment to take into effect after 2025. And so at various COPs, it's very hectic on the climate finance, because finance is one of the key issues in the negotiations. Then during the year, our second main area of work is supporting the work of the Standing Committee on Finance. And so that's a constituted body under the Convention and the Paris Agreement, where it receives mandates on supporting the COP, supporting the parties on finance issues. And so a lot of the work it does is technical work, providing overviews of climate finance flows, mapping various informations on definitions or related to Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, looking at the needs determined by developing countries for implementing the Convention and the Paris Agreement, as well as mapping information on definitions, etc. So there's a lot of technical work that the committee is asked to do, a lot of sensitive, you could say, technical work to inform the parties, to help them have very good informed discussions when it comes to the negotiations at the end of the year. So that's what we do in a nutshell. I'm probably missing a few, 3 or 4 different items and work streams that we're thinking of. There's a lot of finance work that goes on outside of our team in the Secretariat, whether it's the Global Stocktake team or the Transparency team that does the party reporting, or the adaptation team. And so there's a lot of work that we get pulled into and help with other teams in doing. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Patrick. So if we can go a little bit more deeper on what the reports of the Secretariat does, I believe that you have some of this like mapping flows, needs of countries. Can you go a little bit deep on these reports?
Sure. So the main reports are for the Standing Committee on Finance. We support them. And the members of the committee, there's about 20 members of the committee from developed and developing countries, and they interpret the mandates that they're given from the COP or from the CMA, the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement, and they decide on the outlines of what these technical reports should look like. And then at the Secretariat side, we support, under the guidance of the committee, we try to support technical consultants and ourselves that draft the main technical reports, and the committee then also signs off on those reports and develops an executive summary with potential recommendations for the COP and the parties. The first one of these reports that was mandated was the biennial assessment and overview of climate finance flows. So that has been going on since 2014. There have been 5 of these biennial assessments to date. And what it does, it tries to provide a really useful update on the numbers, not only of finance flows that are happening for climate change globally, so that includes international and domestic flows, and tries to provide a good, useful split of that by sector, so that we can get a sense globally if we're on track in our investments into climate solutions. But it also has a good section on flows from developed to developing countries and all the sources of information that are out there on what type of flows are going through from bilateral channels to through the multilateral climate funds, through the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, as well as any private finance flows as well. And there's an assessment chapter as well that looks at both the breakdown of these flows by instrument, by geography, by mitigation and adaptation, as well as more the qualitative issues around the effectiveness of these flows, access to these financial sources, and the impact indicators of what the finance is doing. So it's a quite a rounded report. It can be very intimidating to download and look at. We can set that, but there's just so much information going on, and the report is meant to be there as a kind of compendium of all the latest information and updates. So hopefully a new user can get a good grip on all the climate finance issues associated once they look at that report. That's one technical report. The second flagship, you could say, technical report the committee has been asked to take on is on the needs determination report. That's the needs for developing country parties that they've expressed to implement the Convention and the Paris Agreement. There's only been one edition of this report so far. The mandate was received in 2018, and we developed that first report in 2021. And the second report is due to be published next year. So that's a 4-year cycle for that report. And the added value of this one is that it's the first report that tries to take all of the different types of reports that parties, developing countries, submit to us. So that includes the NDCs, the national communications, the biannual update reports. There's a number of technology-related reports, technology needs assessments and action plans. There's the national adaptation plans. So there's about 9 different types of reports that parties can submit, and we try to collect all the information from those reports on the needs that have been expressed, whether it's costed needs or uncosted needs. And we try to bring that together so that we can get a good sense of what are the financial, technology, and capacity building support needs that developing countries are requesting. But in addition to that, the report also tries to complement that national level, bottom-up, you could say, aggregation of needs with any other global or regional level assessments where modeling or scenarios have been used. So we try to complement it both with reports like what the IPCC does, the modeling that's involved with that, or the IEA, International Energy Agency, IRENA, the Renewable Energy Agency, etc., and UNEP, particularly on the adaptation angle. So we try to complement the national level data with those reports as well to get a full picture. And we talk about not only the actual needs and how they break down, but also the methodologies that are used or disclosed in how those needs are identified, and then the challenges and opportunities as well of following through on them. So that's the second big technical report. And then in recent years, beyond those 2 reports, those 2 flagship reports, you could say, we've had a lot of ad hoc mandates that have come through on developing other reports. So in Glasgow in 2021, we received a new mandate to do a progress report on the achievement of the USD $100 billion goal by 2020 from developed to developing countries. And so that was the first one of them was published last year. And in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we got another mandate to do another 3 of these reports every 2 years. So the next one will be in 2024, 2026, and then finally in 2028. And that coincides with when the time frame of the USD 100 billion per year goal is set from to finish at 2025. And then this year, we also received in Egypt another mandate to do a report for the Standing Committee on Finance, a report on the doubling of adaptation finance. That was a part of the decision in Glasgow that developed country parties were urged to double their collective provision of adaptation finance from 2019 levels by 2025. And so in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, the SCF, the Standing Committee on Finance, received another mandate to do a report on that. So that's a work in progress at the moment. And then over the last number of years, also there have been a few mandates on the SCF to continue its work on definitions of climate finance. So this has always been something that has been covered in the biennial assessments from the very first 2014 biennial assessment, where it did its first overview about all of the operational definitions of climate finance in use by various parties, but also by data reporters, data aggregators, and every biennial assessment since then has done an update of this. But we've also received specific mandates to do standalone work. And so last year we did a dedicated report on operational definitions of climate finance in use, what were being used by parties, what was being used by users outside the UNFCCC process, and any kind of considerations that you could gather from that. In Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, we received another mandate to develop a report on clustering these definitions, operational definitions of climate finance in use. So that's also a work in progress now that we're undertaking to develop this, the report on clustering. And the committee in its first meeting this year provided guidance that this report should look at a potential guidebook or handbook style on definitions of climate finance. So that's an interesting new angle that that we'll be able to add to the conversation on definitions about. The last kind of area of technical work I should speak to is on Article 2, Paragraph 1C. This is one of the three long-term global goals in the Paris Agreement in Article 2. In addition to the temperature goal, there is an adaptation specific goal on resilience, and then there is this Article 2.1c, which is making finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low GHG emission and climate resilient development. And so the SCF over the years has been mandated to do a lot of technical work on this mapping in the main, mapping all the information that is relevant out there to this goal about how you might track progress related to this goal. And it's also been asked to synthesize a lot of the views in submissions on this goal, whether it's from parties and non-party stakeholders. So that's another thing. There was one synthesis completed last year, and in Sharm el-Sheikh there was a renewed mandate to do another synthesis this year, and so that's also a work in progress that the committee is working on. So in a nutshell, what we're working on now are three technical reports for the Standing Committee on Finance: the doubling of adaptation finance, the definitions, clustering of definitions of climate finance, and the synthesis of views on the Article 2, Paragraph 1c of the Paris Agreement. And then next year, we're already preparing for the 6th biennial assessment and overview of climate finance flows, the 2nd report on the $100 billion goal, and the 2nd report on determining the needs of developing countries. So these are, we have a full plate, you could say, but it's fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Well, I believe we're gonna give you a little bit more work next month when we also participate in the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogues regarding Article 1.21.c. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for your time again. This was wonderful to just get everything synthesized. I took notes of everything we'll be sharing with the broad youth, and if we have any questions coming from our audience, we'll let you know by email if that's correct for you. And see you in another chance. Thank you so much.
Happy to help out whenever I can. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up now. Our next session is going to cover further details on the energy transition. We'll discuss the intersection with sustainable development and also how CO2 greenhouse gases, such as methane, will appear at COP27. We're going to look at the carbon market and understand how the expansion of renewable energies fits into our global mitigation plans. And we're going to hear from Dirk Forrester, who is the president and CEO of the International Emissions Trading Association. We're also going to hear from Simon Ben Meraz, who is the renewable energy analyst at the International Renewable Energy Agency, which is IRENA. And last but not least, also from Laura Veronica Munoz, who is working with the Fossil Fuel Treaty. So I just want to remind everyone to join our Slack. We'll send you the link in the chat right now. And I'd also like to remind everyone about our Terra partnership. All of our participants have received an email with the link to access the exclusive learning space offered by Terra. So please check your inbox and find all the additional educational sources about past and future sessions. Could we go to the funders slide, please? And a special thank you to the Van Houten Fund and Eco Interpreters for helping out, the Smith School and the University of Oxford and Oxford Net Zero, and of course the Global Youth Coalition. Thank you for all of your time, and we hope that you enjoyed today's session and that it was a fruitful experience. Thank you.